I had the pleasure of getting access to Padawan by Kiersten White ahead of its release to public, thanks to NetGalley. I was able to read through the book and get a review written in time for its release, so here I'll be going through my non-spoiler thoughts of the book, with a small section near the end where I get more in-depth with some major spoilers. While it may mean different things for different fans, the highest compliment that I can give this book is that it feels like a High Republic story, except it manages to further develop a character we already know so much about. It went far beyond the story connections to Orla Jareni and Comek Vitus, which both surprised and delighted me. This novel focuses plenty on the Jedi and Obi-Wan Kenobi, but with Obi-Wan unsure of himself, the concept of the Force and its connection throughout the galaxy is a recurring idea, something that the High Republic has done extensively in every book and comic released. Unlike most stories set around the prequel era, we don't see much, if at all, of how the Jedi have lost their way and have become obsessed with the rules. Rather, the Jedi Council and the Order as a whole are described as expected from a brand new Padawan. They're very powerful individuals that use what they have to help the galaxy. It's not as genuine or realistic as in the High Republic, but the Jedi through a Padawan's eyes are seen as perfect and ideal. The story itself had interesting twists and turns, even when I thought I knew what was coming. One of the more self-induced problems that I had with this book that relates to the point is that once I got to the second act, I thought I had it all figured out. There were small hints along the way that built up to the plot twists, so I thought that I knew who the real villain was and that I knew the unexpected twist before it happened, even though I was almost never completely right about it. I am glad to say that it never dampened my reaction to the twist, it just lessened the stakes building up to it for me, personally. The first act of the story is relatively slow, but there's one chapter about halfway through that turns the entire story on its head, and it never slows down again until the ending. The ending was much shorter than I anticipated, but it was still strong nevertheless, and did a solid job of wrapping up the major parts of the novel. It shows an important moment between Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon that develops their relationship, almost to what we see from them in Master and Apprentice. I've always liked the character of Obi-Wan Kenobi, but never as much as the majority of fans. But after unintentionally experiencing his life backwards, by going from the Disney Plus series, to Brotherhood, to Master and Apprentice, to this, I've grown to appreciate the character more and what he's been through. Even though I didn't mean to, I'm glad that I was able to experience his more detailed life backwards because I got to see where the character came from and how much each event forced him to grow. Obi-Wan's relationship with Qui-Gon specifically was interesting to see. The Disney Plus series showed him attempting to communicate with his old master after Obi-Wan went into hiding. Brotherhood showed Obi-Wan thinking back on how his master handled both him and Anakin, and using Qui-Gon's teachings as guidance when dealing with Anakin. Master and Apprentice showed that not everything between the two was always smooth, and that they didn't always get along before the mission to Pijal. Now, Padawan shows the early days of Obi-Wan's apprenticeship to Qui-Gon, and how he constantly disagreed with his master, and doubted if he was meant to be a Jedi. Because Qui-Gon kept Obi-Wan on the basics of lightsaber combat and focused on meditation, not allowing Obi-Wan to leave the planet or go on other missions like the other Padawans, Obi-Wan doubted his abilities and whether the Force even wanted him to become a Jedi Knight. He lacked confidence as a young Jedi, and constantly tried too hard to connect to the Force. As a Jedi who we have seen go through heartbreak and disaster time and time again, and still come out strong, it was amazing to see him have such insecurities as a Jedi, and it makes his journey even stronger now. Even though I really enjoyed the story in the novel, Obi-Wan's journey as a character is what bumps it up to the next level. With him being the main character of the novel, everything is from within his head, so as a reader, we get so many great realizations and reflections from Obi-Wan's point of view that forever enhances the character in my eyes. While on the new planet, Obi-Wan does a lot of soul-searching that leads to some really good moments of looking within and self-realization. He learns to accept the feelings that he has and to not be controlled by them. In the novel, Obi-Wan is characterized very similar to how Anakin was as a Padawan, which makes their dynamic all of the more interesting knowing that Obi-Wan once had the same feelings that Anakin had. They care too much about those around them, and those feelings turn into fear of loss and fear of not being good enough to protect everyone. Seeing Obi-Wan feel out of place within the Jedi Order and having these doubts and fears made him a much more relatable character both in the novel and overall. He's always struggled with external problems, like the Clone Wars or losing Satine and Anakin, but we rarely see him deal with internal problems like his emotions. Because he was such a great youngling and was ahead of everyone else, he had fears that he was being left behind when the other Padawans his age were being taken on missions and Obi-Wan was stuck meditating in the Jedi Temple. By giving him these character flaws, I was much more engrossed in the story, and I consistently cared about how his journey would end once he arrived back on the Jedi Temple. Coming off of just finishing Master and Apprentice, there were also a few small connections that got me excited. It's described in the novel how Obi-Wan was rebellious as a youngling, so he was put with a rebellious master in hopes that he would try to be different and follow the rules more. We get to see this firsthand in the novel, with Obi-Wan purposely trying to be different from his master, so he does follow more of the rules, and yet we still get to see his rebellious nature throughout the temple, as well as him leaving on a mission by himself. Obi-Wan also had a short thought later in the novel about how he needed to learn how to meditate and fight at the same time, in battle, even though it seemed impossible, which is a skill that he finally is able to do in a later novel. There was also a beautifully written moment where Obi-Wan finally connects to the Force, and it reminded me of Rey reaching out on Ahch-To in The Last Jedi. The moment that Obi-Wan landed on this mysterious planet and was introduced to the natives, I was instantly hooked. Enough is described to keep me interested, but I still kept wanting to know more and more about these new characters and this mysterious, Force-centered planet. It was a bit overwhelming at first because of how many different characters that are introduced once he arrives. With a bunch of different species and kinds of people, it was hard to keep track of them near the beginning of the novel, but it gradually became easier to distinguish the characters. Some I really grew to love, and others I knew and cared enough just to keep enjoying the story. It took a while, but eventually they became a strong supporting cast for the novel and added a lot to Obi-Wan's journey as a character. There were also a lot of parallels between Obi-Wan and the natives, with them both having to choose the life they have or the life that's possible. With Obi-Wan having doubts that he's even meant to be a Jedi, he's faced with a decision: stay on Lenara with his new friends and keep them safe, or leave to go back to the temple to face the consequences of his actions. For the natives, they have to decide between continuing to live as they have their whole life, but knowing that they will never be safe, or find a new way of living that could be more peaceful, but give up everything their parents sacrificed for them. It was a very interesting connection that continued to play out for the rest of the novel, and the decisions forced both parties to broaden their horizons and learn from the other party. There's a continued theme of self-preservation and not accepting help, but eventually the natives have to consider that Obi-Wan may be doing what's in their best interest. Kiersten White's best decision may have been, in fact, deciding to slowly give out small details about the planet and its people. Getting to discover the history of what had happened on Lenara and what was actually happening in the present day was the main reason that I kept reading. The planet's mysterious connection to the Force intrigued me and made me want to never put the book down. Finally getting the background story through Obi-Wan's eyes was satisfying and added depth to the native characters and their decisions to live on Lenara, even after everything they've been through in their lifetime. The interludes at first were very confusing and felt out of place, but they still intrigued me. However, the scarcity then made it hard to follow, but once it finally connected to the major story, it strengthened both sides and added a lot of background details. They even continued after connecting to the major story and gave the reader details that the character didn't have. Because this book just came out to the public, I wanted to keep my spoiler thoughts until the end, but there's a lot that I want to talk about with this book. If you've already read the book, or if you just don't care about having it spoiled for you, feel free to continue on. Otherwise, I'll have a timestamp somewhere on the screen for when the spoiler section is over and I give my final thoughts. Still here? Let's begin. To start with, I think I genuinely squealed when a four-armed basilisk miner was being described for the first time. I never expected to see Dex going into the novel, but I was overjoyed getting to see the first time that he and Obi-Wan met. He has a meaningful impact throughout the story that makes sense, and it never felt like he was only included as fan service. The fact that he sticks to his morals and helps Obi-Wan and the natives escape that planet adds much more depth and background to the character. Between this novel and Brotherhood, The character has been developed so much more beyond what we saw of him in Attack of the Clones, and the one small diner scene now retroactively carries much more value to it. There were hints of Dooku near the beginning of the novel, and it got me interested in what I thought would be a much larger scaled plot, and yet when it was explained at the end to just be good hospitality from the Jedi Order, I wasn't at all disappointed. I had loved the story I was given so much that I didn't care that what I had expected never came to be. There was a small moment where a fellow Padawan reveals to Obi-Wan that Qui-Gon never actually chose Obi-Wan to be his Padawan, rather that Yoda had requested it. Just like the character, it surprised me that that was even possible, or that it was something that Yoda would do. But it then made sense why the master and apprentice pair had never quite gotten along. It was a very short moment that grew to have a profound impact on the character throughout the novel, and now that it's become a part of the canon, it would be a neat topic to bring up again in future stories. For the most part, I saw the twist that the Lenarans were the villains coming, but the moral conflict between them and Obi-Wan was still interesting to read about because they view their actions as necessary to survive. They aren't purposely harming the planet, it's just what they were taught by their parents before they died. There was a mysterious financier mentioned a few times during the later half of the novel, and while it was never revealed, I really wanted to learn who it was. If there's any sort of sequel to this story, which I doubt there would be, having a powerful person fund a mining trip to Lenara to bring back its life force would be a great jumping-off point, and it would give the story a villain to develop. I kept wanting to think that it would connect to a larger story, but it ended up being nothing more than a tease. When Orla Jareni and Comac Vitus were first mentioned at the beginning of the novel, I thought it was just a nice connection that would come to pass. I never expected Orla to have such a profound role in the novel, even though she was killed on Starlight Beacon hundreds of years ago. Once I could tell I was getting close, I kept looking forward to the moment where I would get all of the details about her mission to Lenara. It helps add background details for both the planet and its inhabitants, but also for Orla's story that we never saw in the High Republic. As someone who reads just about everything, I got really excited the moment her holo message mentioned her having to leave her study on Lenara to go help Elzar find peace, which connects to where the two characters were at the beginning of The Fallen Star. Even though I had liked the character before, her appearance in this novel gave her death in The Fallen Star much more meaning to me personally. It's shown just how similar a young Obi-Wan was to Orla, and how they were both never perfect Jedi. They had their fears and doubts, and sometimes needed to follow the Force in unusual ways. Once the story on Lenara had been wrapped up, I was a bit disappointed at first just because I had really grown to like the new planet, and it being gone means we're likely never going to see it again, but I was able to get over that relatively easily. The natives are still out there somewhere in the galaxy, so we could still have them appear in another story. A solid story, compelling characterization, and the development of a brand new culture makes Padawan a necessary read for any Obi-Wan Kenobi fan, earning a rating of 9 out of 10. Let me know what you thought of Padawan in the comments below, and if you'll be picking it up after this. Remember to like the video, and subscribe for more in-depth reviews like this, as well as up-to-date news stories, Star Wars lore, gaming videos, and more. As always, thank you all for watching, and remember, the Force will be with you, always.